Shalom and welcome to another edition of our Daily Bread. I'm Messianic Torah, and this week's Parashat is the 8th Parashat of the book of Bamidbar, also called Numbers, and it's called Pinchas, which means mouth of copper. This week's Parashat starts in Numbers 25:10 through 29:40 with the half Torah in Aleph Melech, or 1 Kings 18:46 through 19:21. And my message for this year, Parashat 2013-14, is called If You Won't Build His Name. So in this week's Parashat, we start off with, of course, we got a little bit in the end of last week's Parashat, this story of Pinchas and Zimri and Cosby, and he comes in and he killed those two, the Midianite woman and this Israeli man, who came before the congregation while they were weeping and continuing to sin. And it says that Pinchas slayed them, and it stopped the plague, and he's given the covenant of peace, which we start off in this very beginning of the parasha. Now, it's an interesting thing, and it says, because he was zealous for his Elohim and made an atonement for the children of Israel. So a couple interesting things here. I was actually, as usual, there's always plenty of fodder on Facebook for me to discuss. I rolled up about 646 comments deep on this one thread. Most of it was me and like two other people who were going back and forth until they ran out of steam. I don't run out of steam very easily. Especially if you aren't bringing intelligent arguments. So it's kind of interesting because actually that was the second thread that I was on. And I hate to waste my time in some of these places, but, well, a couple things. Number one, it's kind of an anti-missionary type thread, and they're constantly posting, poor scholarship. It's just hard to pass by, like, oh yeah, they're like, oh yeah, besides me, there is no Savior. And so they post verses like that and try and make them be about Messiah. And like, see, there's just God of the Old Testament, and Messiah would be apart from that. And I said, you don't even have to dig into that. Because start with just logic and understand that it's like a bunch of Pharisee arguments or questions. They always have questions. They asked me, actually this gal asked me the same questions every time I go in. She asked the same ones to everyone. I said, you're kind of like a telemarketer. You always ask the same, what are the first two commands? And then just run through this list like a telemarketer who's got their script. And they're going to go, Mrs. Smith, do you, ever read the magazine? And it's just like, you feel like nobody's home there. That's why people hang up on telemarketers, is because they don't feel like you're actually talking to them. You're just running through this script, and you've probably repeated it 75 times. And so there's no real conversation there. And the thing is that, for me, if someone wants to say something, hey, we don't think the New Testament is valid. Okay, great. Show me where you get that. Why do you believe that? Show me. If we're going to talk about the Bible, you think it's in contradiction to the Old Testament, then let's talk about where, and let's hash this out and see if this is true. So the fact is, I don't believe that it's true, but I want to hear what a person has to say so we can talk and say, is this true or is this not? And a lot of these people, they come in and they don't actually understand what they're even talking about. They've got their little pamphlet, just like many Christians who've got their 5 Christian catchphrases. We're saved by grace. He gave his only begotten Son. We're not under the law. They don't even know their own book. And then they start going out and trying to argue with other people who might be actually studying, and they're like on repeat. They've got 4 recorded cliches that they can say, and after that, nobody's home. They don't have anything to say after that. And so I feel really sorry for the people who are so ignorant that they hear these initial first 4 arguments and never bother to ask and say, is this true? They don't go back and verify, and they just go, oh, wow. Oh, well, so says, besides me there's no Savior. I guess that's right. I guess Messiah can't be the Messiah then, because he said it right here. And they don't ask any questions, intelligent questions. I likened it to street magic or something. You see, it's never magic. It's just a trick. And the trick is designed on deception, to deceive you and make you think that something's something that it isn't. There's always a trick to it. Just because you don't understand the trick doesn't mean it's supernatural and it's magic. I can tell you right now, it's not supernatural and it's not magic. Okay? It's a trick. And anybody who studies that stuff, just like the guy who they got all angry about, who came in the mask and started telling all the tricks of how they do all the tricks. Well, it doesn't seem that cool and amazing when you know exactly how it's done. Then you realize it's just a trick executed, planning on, right, your ignorance, your lack of awareness. You didn't see that he had something sitting in between his fingers. You didn't see when he distracted you over here that he was doing something over there with his other hand. You didn't see that it was a setup, and from the beginning he had placed a certain object there that then you thought was random, and you found what he already knew, but you didn't know that he knew that. And so that's the basis of how magic works. And when you understand that, you realize that actually a lot of bad theologies in the scriptures are a lot like magic. They're a lot like watching, I go in and I watch these people, and they might say some stuff, and I'm connected with a lot of people, and I see it in the feed, and maybe I don't say anything and everything. And it's just funny because you can go in the comments and you can watch people's reaction to it. It's like watching the person in the crowd who all of a sudden, had a quarter pulled out of his ear. And he's like, what? Really? There's quarters in my ear? Is there more? How come I never saw them? It's funny. There's a whole show called the Carbonaro Effect. And it's a kind of street magician, illusionist, who, instead of actually people knowing it's a magic trick and, trying to figure out and know the good magician's right, what makes the good magician? The one where you can't see the trick. You don't understand how it works. So we're talking about ignorance and awareness, right? And if I can fool you, fooling comes from you not understanding something of what I'm doing and being unaware of how it actually works and seeing the details that make it work that way. See, your ignorance and lack of awareness makes you think, what? It's magic. Well, in the same way, it goes with Torah study and with Bible study, period. Okay? A lot of these bad theologies, I've said before, the lunar Sabbath, the day risers who think, that the Sabbath's only during the light hours, and the God's special calendar, secret Sabbath, secret holy days, all this stuff, all these doctrines, even the trying to disprove the New Testament, different things like that, they all work off the same thing. They work off, they present to you what they want you to see, a carefully crafted theology that to the unaware person, they don't notice some of the little details, right? Because their minds aren't trained to pick up on those type of things. And as a matter of fact, on the new website, I'm going to do a whole video series, right? And I'm going to break down some of these teachings. And not for the sake of coming to the right answer or to disprove it. We'll have topical studies where I'll present both sides and let you weigh out. Say, I don't have to prove or disprove anything to anybody. But what I do want to do is help people to think intelligently and to analyze things and for themselves to be able to see potential problems and for people to also see potential other ways of interpreting things. So that once you realize that there's not only one narrow way of thinking about it, and you open up your eyes a little wider and you go, well, it could be this way too, it could be that way too. Once you start doing that, now you've got 2 or 3 things that you can evaluate and compare and contrast. When you only have one, and boy, they made a compelling case, and I don't know how to disprove it, so I guess I got to believe them and go with what they're saying. And that's what happens all the time. And those people then turn around, and they share it on their wall, and they start telling other people things they've heard, just even like the anti-missionaries. It's like, did you come to this conclusion from your study of the Torah and then your careful study of the New Testament, thinking maybe I will adapt it and all that? And so, but then when I actually tried to lay it out, here's the problems I had. And so I went back and evaluated, and I thought about the possibilities. And then I weighed it all out again, and I still couldn't accept it. So here's the things that I believe are the problem with the New Testament. Like, I would actually respect that more. But that's not usually how it is. What it is, well, I was born Jewish, and I was told all these anti-missionary things that actually half the time don't even argue against the New Testament. They argue against the Christian interpretation, which is already flawed, of the New Testament. So that's called a straw man argument, right? In a way, it's a reverse straw man argument. Because a straw man argument it's a fallacy where you argue a point that isn't actually even the point. So people do this all the time, right? Because you'll be saying one thing to them, and then they'll restate it in a way that wasn't what you were saying or what you meant, and then they'll battle that. And they'll make that seem to look stupid. Well, of course, and then they think that they won the point, when in reality you have to back them up and say, hey, wait a minute. You need to correctly define my point and understand my point I'm making. So that way if you're going to argue, you can argue with what I believe, not with something I didn't actually even say. That doesn't make any sense. We're getting nowhere at that point. We're making up imaginary friends and imaginary arguments, and so that we can defeat those imaginary arguments that I never said. Now, when you're getting into a series of things such as not, talking about disproving the whole New Testament, then you've got all these points along the way. And if every step of the way you don't understand where I'm coming from and what I'm saying, and you restate it to me, but that restatement that you're now going to argue with is flawed, then we have to back up and make sure that what you're arguing with, if you're going to argue, actually argue against my true points. Disprove those. Then I can determine if they're wrong, that I can then reject them and remove them from what I believe, or we can realize that there wasn't a problem with it and that you were wrong. And then you should remove what you believed. You see, that's how it goes. But see, a lot of these people, even the anti-missionaries especially, the anti-missionaries a lot of times are to me just like the zealous Christian who doesn't really, they're anti-law sometimes, right? But they don't really know the New Testament themselves. Like, hey, I don't have to take you to the Old Testament. We just go to the New Testament and disprove. Like, if you don't even understand your own book, then how are you going to tell me that your book is teaching that you don't have to do the Old Testament when you don't even really actually understand what you're talking about for your book that you're saying you keep? So before we go to the Old Testament, let's go to your New Testament. That's how I would approach a Christian. On the reverse side, you have a Jew on the other side who might be against the New Testament. But most of them don't know their own Torah very well. I mean, they bring out things, show me one place in the Tanakh where it says anything about where God ever accepts a human sacrifice. I said, okay, boom, here. He commanded Isaac, Yitzhak, to be brought up as a burnt offering. Then they said, wait a minute. He was just doing that to test him. Okay, just logically draw it out here. So let's say, human sacrifice, that's pagan. I'm going to see if Abraham will do that. Here comes the test. First of all, let's just say and pretend he actually commanded him to go do it. Logically, you start with a problem. Because now what can that servant do? You've commanded me to actually sin. If I don't obey you, I've sinned because I'm not obeying you. If I do obey your command to do a sin, I've also disobeyed you who says don't sin. So when you ask that question, I can't do anything. Every choice I make is a sin. You see? Now, do we think that that's what was happening? But let's take it a step further. I mean, that's just logically, basically looking at what would that mean if that was the case? What you're saying is true. Well, it doesn't work. But let's go a second witness. Let's go a second time and find another way that's a bad idea. The next way is saying, okay, let's just believe that that's true. It reminds me of when Christians think that Jesus broke the Sabbath and all that. And I'm like, how can you even You're so against the law that you'll say that he broke the law. But if he broke the law, isn't he not perfect and then no longer a valid sacrifice and you got no salvation, no Messiah? Like, doesn't he at least have to be perfect besides the fact that it said he was perfect all the way through there? But they're willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater and defeat themselves. It doesn't make any logical sense. It's like, okay, well, let's start with the basics. It's like talking with a child. Like, okay, first you got to understand the basic concepts, right? If you teach a kid, right, about anything, a lot of times when they're really young, they just don't get it. They don't understand the words you're saying and they don't apply them correctly. And that's how it feels a lot of times talking to people about the Scriptures. Because it's like, can we just stop and think first about what you just said? Before we get into a complex argument, let's pull up these points and all that. Let's just look at what you're saying, make sure that we're clear so that I can see what you're trying to say, this is how it is, and then we'll just start with some basic logic to see if that can even be possible before we get into running around and checking out this word and that version and all this other stuff. We don't need to do all that if we've asked a stupid question. Okay? So as it says, no stupid questions. That's not exactly true. I think in religion there's a lot of stupid questions. Anyway, so when we talk about this, we start off with this concept and say, okay, let's say that he asked him to do something pagan. That's a sin. That creates a ton of problems. Right? But let's just say that happened. What would happen? What would be the outcome he would want? That Abraham would say, no, I'm not willing to do that, which is pagan. Ha, passed your test. High five. And then get rewarded. Or if he says, okay, I'll do that thing that's a sin, and he gets punished for trying to do that, right? And what happened? God told Adam and Hawa, don't eat from that tree. Okay? So don't eat from that tree. Then they were tested. Here comes the serpent. Says, every other thing to try and get him to do this. Then they ate from the tree. And what did they do? Get a reward for doing what they shouldn't have been doing? Or did they get a punishment? God punished them. So that sets a basic pattern right from the beginning. That if God tests you, right, that was the first test on mankind. And you fail the test, you get a punishment, not a reward. What was Abraham given? If that truly was this pagan thing, and it was just a test to see if he would sin, then he was going to do it. The angel had to stop him from doing it. He was doing it and simply said, because you didn't withhold. In other words, because you were going to do it. Then he blessed him. Now, if it was a sin, does he ever bless people for being willing to do the sin? Do you see how that's the exact opposite? Just like Moshe said. Set before you blessings and cursings, right? Life and death. Choose life. Life is obedience to the Torah. Death, cursings, that's disobedience. Okay? That's what you get. The wages of sin is death. The wages of sin is not making you one of the most blessed people in all of the Scriptures. Okay? It just doesn't work. It's a dumb question. It starts off in Stupidville, to be honest. Because if you just stopped and asked yourself, and it's like, wow, these are the people who are in these rooms, and there's always 4 or 5 of them. They're like a little pack of wolves or something, and they're spouting their theologies. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a lunar Sabbath or whether it's a anti-missionary, right? They always travel in a little group of supporters. And then one person comes in who doesn't believe like them, and they all start 3 or 4 or 5 of them jumping on them, asking them questions so that you're trying to answer like 5 questions at once. And then like, why didn't you answer me? And it's like, well, you asked me 3 questions, then you changed the subject and asked another question in between 2 other people asking me 3 questions, and then changing the subject and asking me 4 more questions. So like, I get it, right? I get what you're trying to do. Do you actually want to know the answer to these questions? I say the same thing every time. Okay, slow down. Sorry, Talker B, with the 27th question, before we finish talking about the first one. We're going to address this step by step. Because if you really want to know the truth, you're willing to go and take it step by step. If you ask the question because you want to answer it, don't just ask a question to go nowhere. That's a waste of everybody's time and a distraction. It's like saying, hey, what's the square root of pi? Hey, how many blue horses can we fit in a pickup truck? Like, there's no point to it. Like, be intelligent. If you have a question, That you're saying, you know what? I believe this. And you know what? I believe this and I believe that you're wrong. So I'm going to ask you a question that's going to prove that you're wrong. Great. Then let me answer. Because what we're going to do is we're going to take that question and we're going to go through it. And I'm willing to accept whatever the outcome is. If we go through it point by point and I'm wrong, boom. Guess where that idea goes? Guess I'm wrong. But every time I try and go down these roads with people, they're already wanting to ask 2 or 3 other questions that are off topic. I say, no, let's just stick with this one thing that you said. So I went into this thread. It's like 600 comments. And it's like, well, it was just like the one previous to it. Oh. And he brought, the gal quoted a segment from Leviticus saying, I brought the sin sacrifice. She'll be a female lamb. And then she said, not a human male. Okay. This is just, it's hard. Because in some ways it's a waste of my time. Because if we don't start intelligently, I could talk to, an end table and get as much intelligent conversation out of the same thing. Okay? Actually, I could probably talk to one of my kids and get more intelligent conversation on the Torah, to be honest. That's sad. You guys are adults, and it's like, you're out there even promoting. Like, I would actually respect if somebody was going out there saying, hey, this New Testament is wrong, and and they came out and they knew the Torah. And they said intelligent things, and they created, brought up points that needed to be addressed and that were valid points and good arguments to track down, and then they went through all the points because they could prove their point, and they're about to show you, let's look up every one. I got all day. We'll go through every one of them. Let's pull up our scriptures. Because if you're right, prove me wrong. Please do it. I'm patient. I'm willing to go there with you, and I'm willing to concede. But what happens instead is it's like they bring up a question they don't even know the answer to. I ask them another question about the question to clarify it. Hey, well, define to me this. Someone's like, where does God ever say He's going to take on a man form? Show me that in the Bible. And I'm like, show me where He says He's going to take on the form of a bush, a fiery bush. Did He warn them before? Hey, I'm going to eventually come up and I'm going to be like a fiery bush. And then it happens? Did He say He was going to be in a pillar of smoke on Mount Sinai before it happened? Show me the verses. Because the logic behind it is that this is invalid because you're saying that He came as a man, but we never saw that He was going to come as a man, therefore He can't. That's the breakdown of the argument. So then you start with the basics and say, has He ever done anything that He didn't first tell you that He was going to come and do? Especially when it comes in context to how He might communicate or manifest Himself. Did He tell you He would send every angel to you that He ever sent? Did He tell you that He was going to speak out of the cloud? That He was going to speak through the burning bush? People say, but He's not the burning. Who is the burning? What is? Oh, it's an angel. Oh, yeah? You're just filling in the blanks here because it doesn't say that. You could interpret that it might have been, but you can't disregard that it might have been something else or anything else. And it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, even the voice that called and talked to the people from Mount Sinai, when did He say He was going to be in the invisible form of the voice that comes out and talks to him there? Right? To make the argument that He had to foretell you how every way He might ever manifest Himself, it doesn't make any logical sense. It's a bad question to start with, because if you're going to open up that, you have to say, okay, what was it, right, that when He first spoke, when Adam first heard Him, how could Adam be forewarned of the first time he was going to hear God speak if he had never heard God speak yet? Was it written down somewhere? Was it etched in the grass? And he knew, God can't speak to me because it wasn't pre-told me that God was going to speak to me. Like, the logic there doesn't make any sense. That's not a rule that is required. So that doesn't prove your point. That if He didn't say He was going to manifest Himself in a man, that it can't happen. And that doesn't even make sense. Anyway, the thing that I ask them back is that, because if someone's going to say they know something, it's like, well, know something then. Great. Blow my mind. Come on. Show me all that you know about that subject. But what happens is they bring up an argument that they can't solve, and they don't even understand the questions that they've asked. And they don't know anything about all the pieces that are integrated in that you would need to know to even be able to prove that one way or another. So it's like, okay, great. You're talking about the manifestations of God. Explain to me then when the Spirit of Elohim is breathed in to man who was formed, right? Does that Spirit of Elohim, is it still part of Elohim? Is it become part of them? Is there then a separation between that and Elohim? And explain to me the Ruach, the Spirit, the breath. We breathe in, right, and we breathe out. Well, if that's the Spirit of Elohim, if He breathed in them the breath of life, what happens when we breathe it out? Why does it change? What happens with the oxygen that goes in our blood? Is that still the Spirit of Elohim, and is it connected to Him? Is He in us? Or did He transfer something to us that now is just us in us? And does that oxygen that goes into the blood is it still considered a separate element that's just residing in us, or has it become who we are? What's the soul? Because once you add the Spirit, right? He breathed the Spirit in to the man that He formed of the dust of the earth, and it became a living soul. Where did that living soul come out of? How much does it weigh? How big is it? What's its mass? We don't know this stuff. Scientists don't know this stuff. Where are the pictures of the person's soul? What does it look like? Where did it come from? How did the two combinations create? Out of what matter did it come from? What dimension, what universe is that in? Is it in multiple dimensions simultaneously? You don't know. You don't know anything. We don't know anything. That's the whole point. Before you're going to start having an argument about the nature of the manifestations of God, who A, you've never seen, you've never even heard His voice, you don't know what He looks like, sounds like, or anything. Okay? But you're an expert on the being who you don't even know what your interaction with Him is, other than your imagination? It's the same thing that Messiah said. None of you seen the Father except for me. So then how's everybody an expert on the Father? They're not. But they think they are. They're an expert on something that they've read about. Where did they read about it? I grew up a Jew. So what? So you were born and your parents told you something. Did you see the fire on the and the smoke on the mountain? No, neither did they. Did they? Maybe somewhere along that bloodline, if you're truly a Jew, one of your ancestors saw something. They were probably, if they did, one of the ones who then saw and actually still rebelled against God. Right? So is that a big claim to fame? It isn't. The point is, you yourself, you don't know what your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa saw and believed other than what was passed forward. And guess what? It's not 100%. It's not a disc that goes from one generation to the next and says, here's everything great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa ever saw and thought about what he saw. And we're just going to keep plugging that into everybody's brain so there's no loss. No difference in interpretation between a father and a son. No, we got it. Really? And I know some people think, hey, with the oral Torah and things like that, yep, it was just, everyone's got a great story. Great. Where did you hear that story, or did you make it up in your imagination? Oh, because I've heard stories about how the Jews were so careful if they made one mistake on a Torah, they'd throw the whole thing away and start over. So what? That doesn't necessarily prove that that thousands of years have gone by and there was never a mistake in one Jew's mind from generation to the next, let alone from the fact that when he walked out to go get groceries, he forgot and got the wrong kind of eggs? Are you kidding me? Let's plug our brains in here. But somehow, you know stuff. You don't even know where the stuff you know comes from. And you don't know everything that came from the source that you're saying that you now represent. You don't know everything your father thought and saw, let alone your father's father or their father's father before them. So you can't brag to me about how awesome it is and then how much you know the nature of the creator of the universe. You don't know how Wi-Fi works or why a heartbeat starts in a baby or where a soul is. I could sit here all day and list 1,000 things you don't know and understand, that we as mankind don't know and understand. And then that isn't even to get to the list of the things we don't even know we don't know. Okay? So this whole constant zealousness and, oh, I'm going to prove you wrong and all this, it makes no sense. There's no place for it. You are a speck of dust. I am a speck of dust when it comes to knowledge. And what we don't know is so vast. That's why there's no reason for me to run around and start going, oh, I got this whole nature of God, soul, time thing figured out, and everybody else must be a dummy. Really? And it's so funny because all the people in these groups, they're always, oh, you're so condescending. And I'm like, I posted a verse. You're teaching. I said, I'm not actually teaching anything. You asked me a question saying it's nowhere in the scriptures. I just posted a verse in response. I've neither taught, right, nor have I condescended because the verse happens to be contrary to what you're saying explicitly. The fact that you said there's no such thing, it doesn't even have to prove it. If it was no such thing, I wouldn't even be able to pull up any verse that even looked like it disagreed with you if it really didn't exist. Right? So even if it was wrong, but it looked like it could be contrary, you would have to, an intelligent person would at least concede the fact that, well, you know, if a person could take this other way. But people go in there spouting things like, oh, yeah, good luck finding a verse. And it's like, oh, luck is a pagan god. It's funny that your whole dig is about that Jesus is an idol, and so you don't follow that. And even in your phrases and the words you say, you're talking about luck, saying good luck when that's an idol. Like, the whole thing is sad and comical all at the same time. And trying to have an intelligent conversation means that we have to slow down and we have to start thinking. And yes, we have to plug our brains in. And yes, we have to analyze if this was a dumb question before we try and solve it. You know what happens? It's like it says, the blind leading the blind, both fall into the pit. That's just like a question. A bad question, just like the Pharisees threw at Messiah over and over again, trying to trap him. Okay? When the question's wrong, then there's no right way to answer a wrong question. A slanted question that can't be answered correctly. That's why people use them. They're a trick question. It's the same way with a magician. There's no way to pick a card at random if you already understand that the card that I picked probably isn't randomly picked. Or there's a trick so that it's not really random. You know, what if all the cards in there are one card in the deck? And then someone says, hey, just pick any card at random. Then I'm picking the card that you know I'm going to pick. You can pull another one, like the old saying, nothing up my sleeve. Well, if I can make it so that you pretty much think you're picking whatever, and then I slip the one to touch your finger that is a card I already know, right? Then I'm guaranteed that wasn't actually a random card. You had the perception it was a random card, but you're actually picking the card that I already know. I know a few card tricks, so I know how it goes. And it's funny because some of the more elaborate setups, the whole trick to it is essentially that you make it look impossible. I remember when I was younger, I used to do this trick just for friends. And I would actually have somebody else, because I knew, right, what trick, like the friend of mine who I showed the trick to, because I could do the trick and say, hey, pick any card. Boom. And I could go and shuffle, and I could do whatever I wanted with the cards, and I could pick out the card that they picked every time. Why? Because there was a trick to it. And at one point, to make it even seem crazier, I would simply tell my friend what the trick was to make sure that whatever card they picked you could know what card it was, I would leave the room. Now, I knew before he started shuffling the deck in front of them and randomizing supposedly the cards, I would leave the room. I already knew what card they had to pick. I would be out of the room. He would shuffle them. He'd let them shuffle them. He'd do anything it took to make you think that there's no way that there's any setup going on here. Then he would ask them to pick a card. Then they would pick the card, and out of the other room, I would tell them, call out what the card is. I could have them go hide that in the deck. I could have them take the deck and hide it somewhere where I'm not. I could stand on my head and say, hey, it was a this. And they'd be like, whoa, mind blown. How could you know? They just don't know the trick of how it works. And so they think it's something that it isn't. And it's the same way with theologies. All these things are things that if you don't know them, don't let someone rock your faith or whatnot by presenting you as something you can't understand or you don't understand, or presenting a problem that you don't know the solution to, and so, well, I must believe them. Guess what? There's 1,000 things you don't understand in the Scriptures. So if that's what's going to be the basis of your faith, it's too late. It's already going to be wrecked. Because I can point out all kinds of things you won't be able to explain. Okay? That has nothing to do with your faith. Okay? Or your belief. Because when you actually understand and humble yourself and realize, boy, I don't know that much. But here's what I've been studying, and I can only talk about what I've studied. And there's a lot of ways that could be wrong. And if one of them asks me a question to something, and then I don't like a bully. And you see, that's the reason why I go into them. Because these people, they go in and they bully people. They'll get somebody who doesn't know very much. They'll ask them a few questions, 3 or 4 ganging up on them in the comments. And high five each other, like our status each other, and it's like, that's so corny. It's like bullies who are tough because they've got their 3 friends there, and they're like, hey, and they're picking on somebody who can't defend themselves. And meanwhile, they're high-fiving their buddies, like, yeah, look how tough I am because I got 5 friends, and I'm picking on some weak little kid who can't defend themselves. Well, I can defend myself. So if you ask me a question in the Torah, I'm not going to wilt away like some lily. Okay? I'm going to answer your question with the Torah. And then we're going to ask you some questions about what you understand. And they always come with these things like, oh, well, you must know the Torah. I said, let's compare credentials. How long have you been studying? How many hours do you study the Torah a day, if any? How many times have you read the entire Torah? Have you looked at every word? How many word studies? How many studies have you written? I mean, hey, I can sit there and bust out binders that are 3 inches thick. I got a whole wall full of them. Okay? My studies, my knowledge doesn't come from renting some or buying some DVD on the hot new theory floating around the Messianic thing. It doesn't come from an email. It doesn't come from my yeshiva, It doesn't come from some rabbi somewhere. It comes from my study of the Torah. I can look at those other things. Oh yeah, I got a big library. I got commentaries. I got rabbinic commentaries. I got all this stuff on my dictionaries and every other thing. And I look at those too. But my understandings come from my studies. So I can actually talk about it. I've read every single word in the Torah. Okay? I've looked at every sentence individually, analyzed its sentence structure, looked at the components of it. That's what all this stuff is. When I go through the Torah, oops, page came out. See? Every sentence is separated. Every main element of the sentence is either underlined or circled if it's joining different things, and the sentence structure is laid out visually. Okay? I've spent years doing that. I look up the meanings of the words, the Hebrew, the ancient Hebrew pictographs. Doesn't mean I'm right. I'm pretty sure I study more than the people who are talking, because after 5 minutes you realize they got a five 5-word vocabulary of some cliches that are anti-missionary cliches. Oh, what about this? And, oh, is this? Well, I say, okay, well, let's answer that. I give them an answer. Oh, nowhere in the Tanakh does it say that. Oh, here's 3 spots. Oh, well, that doesn't count, and that doesn't count, and that doesn't... I thought you said nowhere. I mean, you already pulled up 3. That's just off the top of my head. If you really want me to pull out, my e-sword and do a little study on it for an hour, I could probably come back with 15. Okay? But this doesn't exist thing, I don't know. Doesn't exist. I wouldn't be able to just whiz-bang something off my head in 15 seconds that I could already think of that contradict what you're saying. It's all this big, fake puff, and they pick on people who don't know anything. They pick on the ignorant. And part of the reason why I do 646 comments on something is so that the next person who comes through and sees all their garbage can actually see a response to everything that they said. And they can see how they misstated what I'd said back and then tried to argue with what I actually didn't say to try and disprove me. And then I go out and write it segment by segment. Nope, this is what I said. Here's what you said I said. Notice those 2 are different. And then here's what you said. And this is how what I actually said disproves what you said. I mean, I break it all down to the basic elements for them. So there's no question of what happened. Then they ask another question. Well, it's just, they move on to something else. And they don't actually concede the fact that, hey, I just proved to you that not all sin sacrifices are female. I just posted a verse right above the one you have where it's a male sacrifice. So it's not really about whether it's a female or male. That's been invalidated. Oh, it's not human. Oh, okay. Well, I just showed you here an example of a human sacrifice. Condoned and actually commanded by God. And then if you say, oh, but he was really telling them to sin, well, then we'll break all that down. I don't care where you want to go with this. The truth will be the truth and it will come out. Let's dissect every single thing. But then they run, or they change the subject, or they ask 10 other questions, or they start throwing out insults and, oh, well, you're just Christian. I'm like, I don't know any Christian who thinks the way I think. So to call me a Christian doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Please, bring forth the proof. Again, the whole time these are actually bearing false witness. To say that I have Christian doctrine, especially about specific items where I told them, no, I don't believe that. And then they're like, oh, you believe this? And I'm like, how are you telling me what I believe instead of asking me? I don't believe that. I believe the exact opposite. Therefore, what you just said was bearing false witness, which is a violation of the Torah you say that you hold dear and that you're promoting. You've accused me of something that's not true. And you don't care that I've told you, and actually even said it in the comments 3 times now, that it's not true. That I don't believe that. And so, again, it's because they want to be right, because these guys, they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do when someone knows the Torah better than them. They don't know what to do when someone has an answer to their question, or to their statements that are supposed to be the unanswerable questions. They're like a deer in the headlights, and then they resort to insults, or, oh, you're so condescending, or you think you know everything, or I'll ask you a harder question, even though you just answered this question and I didn't acknowledge that you actually answered it. I'll ask you another one. It's like, okay, so what's the goal here? To find one thing in the universe I don't know? You will be able to find it. I don't know all things in the universe. Never claimed to. But how does that in any way change the fact that if what you asked I presented, when you said it didn't exist, then you should stop saying that. But these people will continue to take these same 3 or 4 things that they have to say and tell to other people who don't know how to reply, in hopes to prove to them New Testament's wrong, Jesus is wrong. It's ridiculous. I have zero respect for the lack of intelligence. It's just, that's all it is. I don't know how to say it. It's not actually saying it to be mean. It's just literally there's a lack of intelligence there. If you ask a question and tell them well, there's no such thing, and then they present it to you, and they present you multiple options, and then you say, see, you can't show me. And it's like, okay, maybe you're crazy, because I just showed you. I didn't tell you what I thought it meant. I didn't take a verse that needed to be interpreted. I just simply posted it where it explicitly says right here. So you realize that you're not having a conversation. Okay? It's a telemarketer. You ask the telemarketer a question, and it goes off their script, and they just keep going with their script. And you realize, hey, nobody's home. This guy he's not talking with me. He's actually just reading his script. That's when you hang up and you say click. If there's no conversation there, then this is just a sales pitch. That's what I said. The lady who asked me the same questions. She didn't even realize she asked them to me before, and I actually went through a whole big long thing with her and answered them all. It's funny when their salespeople forget. I've had that before where people will call me back from the same company, and it's the same person. I recognize them. And they ask me the same questions, not realizing they called me yesterday and asked me all the same questions. And it's like it's hard for me to respect that you don't remember we talked already, and that we already did all this dog and pony show with your questions and answers. You know, it doesn't prove anything. If you know your subject, get off script. Let's talk about the Torah. So I asked him, hey, he said, we don't have to talk about the New Testament. Let's all talk about the Torah. You know, I asked them a question, how long have you been studying Torah right there? It's not because I'm more right if I've studied more, but like I had to ask him 4 times. Have you read the Tanakh from cover to cover, every single word in order? Even once before. And they won't answer. And then eventually they come back and answer yes, when I won't stop until I get an answer. And half the time I don't know is that answer true, or now you just want to save face because it's easy to say yes and there's no way I can prove that that's not true. But hopefully they're not lying, because then they're lying, then, you know, about God's Torah. You know, I don't know. To be right. Why be right? You're not right. None of us are right. We are wrong. We are more wrong than we are ever right. Okay? I already know that. But it's everybody else who doesn't know it. And they say, oh, you're condescending. It's like, you think you know it all. I said, no, actually I've already stated twice. I don't know anything. That doesn't mean when you say something stupid and I ask a couple simple questions, logical questions about what you said, and you realize that what you said kind of does sound stupid, that's not me being condescending to you. That's me just asking you a question about what you said. I haven't said anything yet. You know? I mean, this is the problem. So one of the things on the new website we're going to go into is just critical thinking. Just if people plug their brains in, we'd be in a so much better place. I mean, I posted earlier, the worst thing in this world is ignorant zealousness. Like, that's the worst thing in religion, I should say. Is the fact that people are zealous about religion and they don't even know what they don't know yet. And that's always a dangerous thing. I don't care if it's Christians, Messianics, or Jews, or even other religions, you know, Islam and things like that. Like, anytime there's a zealousness, when ultimately the people don't understand how little they know about people and about God and about the universe, it always leads to trouble and danger, right? It's kids. It's kids with a sharp knife running around that is going to hurt themselves or hurt others. There's nothing good that comes out of it. And just as the scriptures are as a sharp two-edged sword, you know, it's just, it blows my mind that people, I don't know, for me, I'd appreciate someone intelligently breaking down, showing the error, just as the scriptures say. The wise man will, you know, if you correct him, he's going to thank you. Like, I would think that was awesome that someone intelligently showed me here, this, and this. What usually happens is people have a very shallow knowledge or no knowledge at all. And then they come in, guns a-blazing, to prove you wrong. They're neither listening to what you're saying, and you're willing to back up and take it slow with them, but it's like, hey, you know, plug your brains in. You know, that's all I gotta say. So we get back into this message, which is, if you won't build his name. In the beginning of this parashat, we have 2 Yisraelim. We have Pinchas and Zimri, right? So, these are two different types of people. One is doing things that aren't in alignment with God. Right? Essentially, it's just like an argument. And then you have another who is doing the will of God. And the difference in the outcomes is that everybody thinks, right? Oh, their lady was like, well, I'm a Jew. And it's like, don't brag to me about your heritage. If it's even real. Do you even know? Do you know who your father's father, all the way back? I doubt that you have any written records of that. Not to mention the fact that whether you follow the bloodline through the mother or the father, or whether there was anything going, do you have all the DNA tests of all the people in your upper lineage, that they stayed within their own tribe and everything like you don't know that. You don't know it. You have no way to verify any of that. So your word and your records, which go back a very small portion of that history, when we compare it to the thousands of years, all the way back to the original sons of Yaakov, yeah, unlikely, highly unlikely. But people make stuff up all the time. Everything they know that's ancient, that's just like it was fresh. It was in a flavor lock. It's from 2,000 years ago, but it tastes. This piece of knowledge tastes like a fresh potato chip. Yeah, whatever. That's your imagination. That's the potato chip of your imagination. Okay? And as soon as you figure that out, you realize, wow, it's like being in a court of law. Okay? There's evidence that is circumstantial. There's evidence that's not permissible because it's not provable. You can say, well, my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa had blue hair. Well, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Is there any way we can verify that? No. So, other than just your imagination of saying those words, it's not permissible. Okay? So don't come with facts that are not provable. Okay? And with things that you haven't even thought of and that you can't prove. And then you have to build the context and say, what does it mean? What does it matter? Oh, you're a Jew? So what? There's lots of Jews. You look back at Israel, who saw God, who walked around the presence of the Holy Tabernacle, and they got wiped out. Right? This week's Parashat, Caleb and Yahushua. The only two out of all those men. Their children were allowed to grow up, but it said 600,000 came out. And how many didn't get in trouble? 2. Right? So 599,998, right? Or, I don't have a calculator in front of me, but we're going to call it pretty much almost all, statistically, of those people didn't make it and sinned against God and didn't get to go into the kingdom. So how are those statistics and those numbers? Do you want to brag? Hey, I was a great-grandson of Korach. Well, Korach didn't do very good things. Okay? So saying you were Israel, part of Israel, if you could even prove that, which you can't, doesn't mean anything. Just like when Mashiach says, who's my mother, who's my brother? Those who do the will of my Father. Those people who are obeying Torah, Caleb and Yahushua, right? That's true Yisraelim. True Israelites. Okay? That we know. Because what did it profit the other ones? Oh, I'm a Jew. So what? If you're a Jew and you don't keep the Torah. The actual truth in the Torah, not raised, learning rabbinic writings and doing a bunch of traditions and all these things, that don't count. I'm talking about the Torah, not man's religion, not man's interpretation of the Torah, but the Torah. Okay? Your deeds, every one in your life, in measurement up against the laws and the commandments of the Torah. And if you're following a law from a rabbi who didn't interpret that law correctly, and you're counting that, oh, I kept it, look, all these times I did that thing the rabbi told me. Well, if the rabbi was wrong, then you broke it. Okay? You don't get any points for what you thought you kept. Which goes into the sins of ignorance that I was talking to them about. See? So this is about, there's 2 countings of Israel, just like we saw in this week's Parashat. This is the second count. We already counted them. Right? We counted them once before. Now, out of those 600,000, how many of those people are still around? 2. Right? That's ridiculous numbers. So when it says, if the righteous are scarcely saved, what then of those who do wickedness? Yeah, I believe it. Doesn't look like huge numbers. Right? It's not half. Okay? What's already happened before is those people who claim to follow God, who saw His miracles, who saw the plagues and all of that, 99% of them died for disobedience. So what was the value of them being an Israelite and coming out of Mitzrayim only to die because they refused to obey God? Well, what's the bragging rights there? I got away from Paro and then I upset God and He killed me? Is that the claim to fame? I don't know what that means. All throughout the Scriptures, it's about God's people, and not just about God's people, but how they continually sin and violate the Torah and go against God, and how He punishes them and kills them and plagues them and does all that. Let alone the other nations. So don't brag to me saying how you're connected to God's people. That makes no sense. Because right now, God's people don't have a great track record. There's few and far between the people who are actually righteous and doing the will of God. Those people, yeah, that's great, but are you one of them? I don't know. Which page are you written of on? Where should I be reading about you? Because there's not a lot. And there was a lot of people. Out of the millions before you, few of them made it in the book with some mentions. Look at Kalev and Yahushua. Look at Kalev. How many mentions does he get in the Scriptures? Here was a guy that said, because he wholly followed Youre, he was saved, and out of 600,000 men. I don't know, that's a pretty big deal. I'd be like, hey, wow, look what I did. And he gets mentioned a couple times. So how great are you? What great deeds have you done? Have you stand in adversity among all of God's people, and you were the one that was really obeying and following when they all wanted to kill you and do all this and all that? Like, people are clueless. You're not even close to those levels. And yet people are walking around all proud, trying to pretend they got His name. Well, I'm a follower of God. Look at me. I'm so good, I'm going to tell this guy over here how he's wrong. I'm going to teach these guys the good theology. What have you done? Nothing. Nothing substantial. So what's the point with all the puffed up and the pride and all this, when humility and study is the place we should be at? See, because the bottom line is, this week's Parashat teaches us that if you won't build His name, He will find someone else who will. If those 599,998 men of Israel would refuse to go in and do what God said, He'll take the 2. Okay? That's a big group of people to say, well, these guys are all dead. They're not going to obey. That's massive. How about Moshe and Aharon? Moshe, it's your time to die. You can sanctify me. Moshe. I don't know about you, but Moshe's written about all over in here. Seemed like an amazing guy when it comes to the kingdom of Israel. And he's going to go die for a sin. And doesn't get to go into the promised land. Well, where exactly are chapters written about you? Did God speak to you? Are you written of in His holy book? Are you that great and that important among all of His children? I don't think so. So how is it that even there his name will be sanctified? Even with Moshe. Even with Aharon the high priest, who's written of here, who wore the holy garments, who went into the Holy of Holies, who was in the presence of Elohim. That's more than you got. So why is everybody so puffed up? I don't get it. I don't understand it. And all that other stuff, all the arguments and all that, it comes from that. It comes from that pride of being puffed up about what you think you know about God. You don't know about God. You just don't. You're not to the level of knowledge of God even that the people who actually had God's presence dwelling among them, and they sinned, and they were punished and killed, and you think somehow you're awesome? You're not. It just makes no sense to go down that road. And so we look at this week's Parashat and we see the daughters of Zelophehad. Same thing. Same pattern. Right? Because here the man didn't have any sons. Son, Banah, is builder of the name. That's what that means in Hebrew. A builder of the name. Name also means authority. Okay? Not my will, but thy will. This is how a son is supposed to be. They're supposed to do the will and represent their father and be like their father. Okay? When Messiah says, who is my mother, who is my brother? Those who do the will of the Father. That's the identifier. Right? Who's doing the will? That's why we study, so that you know the will. Here, the parable, right? It's a true story, but all these stories are also parables. They create parables. They have parts that represent things. Daughters of Zelophehad. Here's a man of Israel who doesn't have sons who are building his name, building his will. His authority is not being passed on. And therefore his inheritance, which would go to his sons, where does it go? The daughters say, hey, can it go to us? Moshe goes and asks. And the reply is that if he doesn't have sons, it goes to the daughters. Now remember that the daughters are going to be married off to somebody else. And they're going to do the will of their husband, who's doing the will of his father. But if everybody's obeying the Torah, they're all going to do the same will, eventually, God's will. But see, this is the thing. Even the daughters of Zelophehad were told eventually that they should then marry within their own tribe. Right? Otherwise, the inheritance passes from one tribe to another. So we look, if he doesn't have any daughters, then it goes to the next, right, person in line. It goes, I believe, to his brothers. And then his next of kin. You see? So it's still staying close. Within that will, there's an inheritance there. Somebody needs to, just like the law of the brother, if the man dies and doesn't have any sons, that you're to take up his wife and raise up a son in his name. Why? So that his name may be built, that his will continues. And what happened? In the examples we've seen in the other parashas, and Onan, they didn't want to raise up seed, or give their seed, as it says, to their brother. Okay? And this is the problem. Is that in the same way, people won't build the name of YHWH. Okay? They won't do his will. At the end of the day, that's keeping the Torah. And that's the shame that's really upon Yisrael, and it's been upon Yisrael. So we won't keep the Torah. That's been the problem. We won't do the will of our Father. And what was great about Mashiach is here comes somebody who actually did the will of his Father. Not my will, but thy will. Just as the people said, oh, we're of our seed, we're the seed of Abraham. He says, if you were of Abraham's seed, you would have Abraham's works. Right? That's again doing the will of Abraham. They weren't. He says, you're of your father the devil. They're doing the works of the devil because they're not doing the works of God. Didn't matter if they were born seed of this person, this person, this person, this person. Because there's people among Israel, and there's people who have children that are wicked. Don't brag about, oh, well, I'm in. We're all children of Adam. Is that bragging? Is there something there? But there's sons that are wicked and sons that are righteous. And there ain't no bragging about being a son and then being wicked. It's punishment. See, it's about really being a son, really building the name. So in this week's Parashat, right, we have Moshe dying. And he's going to transfer that authority to Yahushua. Which is funny, because the anti-missionaries don't see the obvious thing that we start with Moshe, and then Moshe brings us up a certain way, and then at a certain point, he passes away and puts his authority, right, to Yahushua, the son of Nun. It's not a coincidence that it's the same name for Yahushua HaMashiach, because it's the same pattern. That Moshe represents that letter of the law is going to lead us to the spirit of the law, right? But once we understand and we have understanding and we know the Torah knowledge, second level, deeper understanding, right? Once you have that, that's where you find Mashiach, the spirit of the law. He's the second witness to it. Once you got the letter and the spirit, right? And you do them, then it becomes part of you. That's how you become Echad. Right? When you're the living Torah. Somebody asked me, one of these people, so I can't remember what the question was. It was something about Messiah, and then they were like, oh yeah, so if I live, because I said he was the living Torah, and they said something like, well, so if I live the Torah, will I be the living Torah? Or something like that. So, and I'm like, yeah. That's exactly, I think, the goal. Messiah said he was the goal. He was the living Torah. The Torah lived in him and went out from him to everybody around him. I think that's exactly what the goal of the Torah is. That you do it and you live in them, and then you are that light. And you bear fruit. I mean, use any analogy you want. It all equals the same thing. To be like Messiah, one with Messiah, as he said, I would that you were one with me as I am one with the Father. How is he one with the Father? Because he's literally living out the Torah, the Word of God is living through him and being a living presence on the earth. So it's the same thing. That's why it was funny. I was talking with my wife and she didn't quite understand where I was coming from. But I told her, I said, really, the big argument against the New Testament, and then you have Christians who are like, hey, we love the New Testament, we don't really need the Old Testament. I'm thinking all this about the New Testament. But the reality is even Mashiach said, right, if you would believe Moshe, you would believe me because he wrote of me. But because you don't believe his words, how can you believe the words that I'm saying? So the problem with them wasn't that they didn't believe in Messiah. It's the problem they had was they didn't believe the Torah. Just like when he said, none of you keeps the law. Right? Just like the parable of the virgins who had the lamps and no oil. Well, Proverbs 6:23 will tell us that the commandment is the lamp. Right? The law is light. So when he says none of you has the law, he's also saying none of you has the light. They had the commandments. There was no oil inside it. What they lacked was the Spirit. The oil represents the Spirit of the law. So when you have the commandments, the outer vessel, the outward, and you have the oil, the Spirit also within, when those two are combined, right? And you add fire, which is a model of testing, and that's proven. In other words, testing is taking action. When you actually have to make a choice. That's what proves, right? The commandments. When you have to make a choice. And what you do, your deed, the fruit of that is the light. That's the light. And your light is supposed to shine. Well, like Mashiach said, for what good deed do you stone me? Right? For what light, right, do you want to put me into darkness? Do you want to kill me for? All I've done is produce light. His fruit was obedience to the Torah. So in what is he worthy of death? Because the wages of sin is death. There's no sin. So the fact is, they wanted to pay him out debt. They were like a debt collector saying, you owe us, we're going to kill you because you owe us, you've sinned, we're going to kill you. But see, the wages of sin is death. He didn't sin. So they had no claim and no right to kill him. What he was saying was correct. And they got angry. They think, oh, well, calling yourself the Son of God. Well, if you didn't have sin, you would be the Son of God. That's the whole point. You would be just like your Father. You would be reflecting the will of your Father by not sinning, because He doesn't sin. And the truth and the life comes from Him. And if you were truth and life, you'd be like Him. So, that's the whole point. That people can claim all they want. But they're not building His name. They're not actually producing the light. Even the anti-missionaries, it's funny because it's like, wow, you're supposed to be promoting Torah, and yet already in this conversation you're sinning against Torah, against Torah, against Torah. You're sitting here, you're actually even sinning against your own rules and traditions. Aside from the Torah. Because you're bearing false witness over and over again. The one gal actually, in my opinion, crazily said about, when we were talking about human sacrifice, that, oh, that's sick. That's sick if you think God would command Avram, because she was talking about the burnt offering, to cut up his son into pieces. How sickening. Right? And she was saying it in context of God, like how sick God would be if He was trying to tell him to. And I'm thinking, how in the world could you accuse God? If God said, cut your son up into pieces, then either what's really happening is you're saying, my moral judgment is greater than that of God, and God would be wrong in that case, and He would be doing something that I find sick. As if you were a higher moral authority than God. And I'm thinking, God created all this. And how is that any different than saying, hey, go kill this bull, this living creature that He also made, and you're a creature He also made, and He says, go and kill that bull and cut it up in pieces for what you did wrong. Or to cleanse you, or to cleanse an inanimate object like the altar. How is that, if you can wrap your head around that, and it's like, no, that's cool. Here a person sinned, and I'm going to go kill this animal, and somehow that makes it better? Like, how are you like, that's cool and everything, but kill your son? That's crazy. Like, no, they're both hard to understand. Right? How does killing an animal that has nothing to do with me impact my sin? Or killing a goat on Day of Atonement, how does that in any way cleanse anybody's sin, let alone a group of people? How can you transfer the sins of Israel onto the head of a goat? Explain that one to me. It's a goat. Like, if we really want to get like literal, like, hey, explain that. If the concept seems so foreign to you, guess what? There's a lot of interesting things that we don't understand. And we're all God's creation. It's not unlawful for Him to take life. One person was about to start that argument about murder, because I said that God doesn't command His children to sin. I assumed that what he was going to talk about was, did God ever command anybody to kill somebody else? And then I was going to explain to him that killing and murder are two different things. Murder is the unlawful taking of life. If God tells you to kill somebody, then it by nature is lawful, as He's the lawgiver. So that wouldn't be unlawful taking of life. It's also His creation that He created. It's His possession. Right? He's not taking something from somebody else. He is removing something that's already His possession. But even the idea of, are we going to start testing God and blaming God and trying to accuse God of sinning? Like, the whole mindset to me, it's blowing me away, and I'm thinking, and you guys are the people who, like, I never got that. Like, success leaves clues, right? Don't tell me, it's just like the people saying, we're the seed of Abraham. Well, you can't tell me that and then not be anything like him. You can't say, you know what, look at us, we're special, we're Jews, and then you're sitting there saying all kinds of slanderous things, making false accusations, and doing all this stuff that's against Torah, and then say that, you're defending the Torah. No, you're not. You're not even keeping the Torah. How can you defend it while you're breaking it? That doesn't make sense. I would believe it and respect it more if, they should be the nicest. They should be the nicest people, not slandering, not trying to use rhetoric and make false accusations and make personal attacks and try and slander you and assassinate your character and associate you with things that are unsavory that hasn't been proven yet, just to try and diminish your character because they can't deal with what you're saying about the Torah and deal with the actual points in your argument. Like, to me, it's like, that's kind of being nasty. And I don't think that represents God or His Torah at all. It's shame on them. They would have a standard of Torah, and that standard doesn't need to slander anybody or falsely accuse. Just as I told them, having just judgment. It says right there in the Torah. And then I said, someone asked me about, what about this and what about that? And this verse here doesn't line up with that verse there in the Old Testament. And I said, well, I'll look at that. I'd have to look at the translation and look at it to see what you're saying. It required study. He won't answer it. I'm like, that's what the other gal said. And I go, I didn't say I wouldn't answer it. I said, actually, I would study it. A wise person, right? The Torah actually commands us, before making a judgment, we have to diligently search out a matter. I just said I'm going to diligently search that out before I could give an answer to you on whether it's accurate, what the problem is, if there is a problem or not a problem. How can I say that if I haven't looked at it? So unless they were willing to sit down and spend an hour and look at it and study it out, then how can I do that? But the whole point is, it was just this kind of it's really a kind of a vile attitude, and it's like being in the pit of snakes. They're just biting at you, and it's like, for what point? If you really have the truth, you shouldn't have to slander anybody. If you really have the truth, you shouldn't be afraid to answer questions. If you really have the truth, you should be patient and go point by point, because you know the only answer that they're going to be able to find is your answer. You don't need tactics or rhetoric or fallacies or trick questions to try and make somebody mess up or something like that when you have the truth. That's all magic. It's all tricks. You don't need that if you have the truth. Let's just go address the point by point. So Moshe dies, in this Parashat, and we see the transfer from Moshe to Yahushua. Ding, 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 ding. It's right there in the text. It should be an indicator. Hey, wait, you know what? Moshe transferred his authority to Yahushua. Do you think this guy named Yahushua who came later was trying to do away? Did Moshe, or did Yahushua, son of Nun, do away with Moshe? Did he kill him and take over? Did he replace him? No. Was it God's will? Actually, it was Moshe's will. That he asked for someone to lead the children of Israel. And that's when he went up and put his authority on Yahushua. He was having that conversation with Elohim. See? The fact is that the letter of the law and the Torah, it takes you so far. But it won't take you into the promised land. Yahushua does that. It's not something I'm making up. That's what happened with Israel before. Moshe did not bring him into the promised land. It doesn't mean that Moshe is bad or Moshe, right? They didn't start off with Yahushua like the Christians think, oh, we got Christ. Really? Because it said Moshe was the schoolmaster that brings you to Christ. You think you're at Christ without Moshe bringing you there. You don't know Moshe. You were never with Moshe, so you're not at Christ. You think you are, but you're not. You don't know Christ, just like he says, many of you will come to me in that day saying, Lord, Lord. He says, get away from me, I never knew you. They're saying, wait, we're casting out demons in your name and doing these things, right? Get away from me, you who do lawlessness, you who break the law. Who taught you? You were supposed to be with Moshe, right? Who taught you how to keep the law. So that you would understand who he was. You don't know him if you don't know the law. That's Moshe's job, to teach you the law. Because he's the living law, and you won't know who he is if you don't know the law. It's that simple. So all the anti-missionaries, they don't understand what they're talking about. Just like I was telling my wife, I was like, don't worry about the New Testament. The problem is not with the New Testament. It's not the problem. The problem is you don't know the Torah. The Torah is sufficient. You were given, if you would believe Moshe's words, you would believe my words. Right? How is that possible? Let's just do the math. If this, then that. So if we believe Moshe's words, we would believe his words. Why? Because he's just verifying what Moshe already said. Same words. Messiah gives you a deeper understanding of Moshe's words, which are the basics. He's the one who brings you to Mashiach. When he says, he didn't say, oh, well, you heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say, go ahead. It's no longer valid. He didn't say that. He said, well, you heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say, he who looks on a woman with lust is guilty of adultery. Well, that actually makes it even harder. He magnified the law. He made it bigger, which is what it's prophesied he will do. He will come and magnify the law and make it honorable. Why is it honorable? Because no longer it's not just, oh, well, technically I'm not sleeping with that other man's wife, yet you're still doing other things, or you're lusting after her in your heart. Now, he's made it so that, no, you can't do that even you can't even look on her with lust. So now it's honorable because now, even if you're not committing the act, you're not even thinking about the act, now we've got some honor to what it means to not commit adultery. See? And we've expanded what was said when it was just simply said, you shall not commit adultery. Now those words, which represent Moshe, the letter of the law, you shall not commit adultery, are literal. And literally, you should not go commit adultery. But that's not all the law is, because the law is alive. The law represents life, as a matter of fact. And obedience to God represents life. His word is not dead. It is alive. Now, we'll just go back. This is really basic. But if you go back to Genesis You see, how's life created? One part? Is it a one witness thing? What happened? He took the dust of the earth, breathed the breath of life. Now you got two witnesses, the physical and the spiritual. And it says, and it then became a living soul. So you got life that comes out of the combination of those two things. What happens when it's just a pile of dirt? Looks like life. It's formed in that image, but it's not actually got a soul yet. Because he hasn't breathed the breath of life into it. You know what a body without a soul and spirit is? It's dead. You know what the Torah is? If all you got is the letter of the law, all you got is the candle, the lamp, and there's no oil in it and no light coming out of it, it's death. It's darkness. That's the whole point. So you got one witness with Moshe, but that's not all there is. He gave you the basics. He gave you the letter of the law, the literal. Don't literally go and sleep with another man's wife. But if you studied that enough, if it really converted you, and if you found the truth in what that meant, the truth is you shouldn't even look on the woman with lust. Because when you reject that, you reject it all the way. Right? It's the same thing as, oh, well, I'm going to eat kosher, but I'm technically, I'm going to get me some turkey bacon, because I really love bacon. And then I heard, can't have bacon, so I'm going to get my imitation shrimp and my turkey bacon. And it's like, why are you still lusting after that? If God said it's not good for us, why do you want anything to do with it? If you were following Him with your whole heart, wouldn't you want to reject that whole thing? Whether it was technically kosher or not? Why would you? You see, this is the same issue. Messiah is teaching the deeper level for those people who are already past, technically I'm not doing this, but the inside of the cup is still filthy and dirty. They haven't found the truth yet. They're out there physically doing things. They got tzitzis on, but they're not using them as they were commanded, as a reminder to not going whoring after their own eyes. Instead, they're walking around with their tzitzis all long. Hey, check out my long tzitzis. I'm set apart. Look at me. That's not what tzitzis are for. Tzitzis are a reminder because you're constantly going whoring after your own eyes and sinning. They're a reminder for you that you sin so much you need a reminder right there to constantly remember every time you put your hand to something or you walk somewhere that you're probably going to choose sin. It's not a status symbol. It's a reminder of your wickedness. You need that reminder. See, but that's the whole point. If you take on the things of God and they mean nothing, and they don't mean, and they're not living, and they're not alive, and they're not doing ultimately the will of the Father, then dressing up in a talit and saying, well, I'm a Jew, oy vey, who cares? If the fruit isn't that you do the will of God, then the name, the title, the outward, all that stuff, the DNA, none of that matters. If you won't build His name, then that just simply is not a son of His. Because a son is a builder of the name. Until next time, I'm going to say Shalom.